Okay. Hi, my name is Ed Fletcher, and I chose Turks and Caicos as my island. So it is located north of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I put it right over here. It's located right up there. Here's a satellite image, just to kind of see what the island looks like. Here's a picture that my mom took when we visited there. This is a shipwreck called the La Familie or Famille Express. You can actually go swimming around there. It's actually really cool. They do like field trips out there when you visit the island. So let's get started off with the history of the island. Again, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I in the top left corner, all the way down, I did a kind of like a timeline and pictures of what's going on throughout the history of the island. So originally, the island was inhabited by the Taino and the Lucane Indians. Before Christopher Columbus arrived, they lived there completely peacefully. But when he did arrive in 1492, everyone knows the saying, 1492, he sailed the ocean blue, that kind of thing. He did kill off most of the Lucane civilization within a couple decades, which was really sad. So then this created kind of a vacancy on the island, and there was a really high demand for salt at the time. So this top left picture is the Bermudians coming back to the island to rake salt. And then a little bit later on, the French and Spanish captured back the islands in 1706. And only 4 years later, the British reclaimed the islands, where it did become kind of a safe haven for pirates and British loyalists fleeing from the American Revolution. As you can see, the Treaty of Versailles picture here, Britain ended up retaining the island through that treaty. So they owned the island at that time for just a little bit in the early 1900s. Then a little bit later, the Bahamas hurricane devastated the island, and then Jamaica kind of took over the island. And a little bit later on, in 1962, Jamaica won independence from Britain. So then Turks and Caicos, therefore, became a British crown colony, or it's also called a British Overseas Territory, and that's what it remains as today. So as for political structure, um, it's kind of structured very similarly to the British government, obviously because it is a British overseas territory. You have the office of the governor, the premier, which used to be called the prime minister, but now it's just the premier. The judiciary, the deputy governor, general chambers, attorney general chambers, the director of public prosecutions, the police, and then the House of Assembly. So there are two main political parties, the PDM and the PNP, the People's Democratic Movement and the People's National Party. A few years ago, they did try and make a third party to kind of sway elections, but that party was disbanded as it didn't get enough traction to stay as a complete party there. As for the economy, I put these couple pictures here to kind of show the main sources of income there. So obviously tourism is huge on Turks and Caicos. Tourism, fishing, and offshore financial services are um, the main three providers of income for the island. I put these pictures in the bottom right to show that Americans are actually around 70, a little bit more than 75% of the more than a million people that visit every year. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So Turks and Caicos actually uses the U.S. dollar, even though they are a British territory. Um, so I guess that is due to the more than a million U.S. visitors that visit every year. Their imports are just over 600 million. So they import a lot more than they export. As you can see, only exports of 30 million. Their main export is really just like conch. They don't make a lot on the island. It's more of a self-centered island. They don't really export very much. As for creative production, I chose um, two festivals. And again, the Turks and Caicos shares many cultural elements with the Bahamas, since a lot of Bahamians moved to Turks and Caicos throughout the history of the island. So they share a lot of similarities there. So the two festivals that I picked out were the Conch Festival, which takes place on the last weekend of November, and the Salt Festival, which takes place on the last couple days of April. So as for the Conch Festival, it's basically just a giant gathering of people where they try a lot of seafood dishes. Um, there's conch blowing competition among local fishermen. There's a lot of music and dancing. And it's held on the island of Providenciales, which is just a little island on one of the strand of Turks and Caicos Islands. And then the Salt Festival is kind of like the same thing, but it's to celebrate the history of salt raking. So there's music, there's food, there's drink, there's dancing, there's kite flying, there's bike racing, all that kind of stuff. And it's held near the capital island of Grand. And then finally, they actually did make a chief cultural officer, and his job is kind of just to, or his or her job is kind of just to keep these festivals rolling every single year. Obviously, this year they didn't happen because of the pandemic, which is unfortunate. Hopefully, they can have the Salt Festival this year in the next month or so. And yeah, that's the main job of the chief cultural officer. So then, moving on to cuisine, I picked out four dishes that I thought were really good when I was there. So the first one being boiled fish and grits, and if you can believe it, is actually served as a breakfast dish, which very much surprised me when I had it. So it's usually served with like potatoes and maybe a little bit of vegetables and grits. Obviously, it's fish and grits. It's usually a white flaky fish, so it's nothing like salmon, nothing along those lines. And usually they just add like a little bit of lime flavoring on top to just spice it up a little bit. You know? So then conch fritters, if you don't know what a conch is, it's basically a giant sea snail. Um, and the way that it's prepared is through it's like chopped meat that's soaked in flour, eggs, and milk, and then fried in hot oil. So that's really good. It's usually served with vegetables. Um, the next one I chose is lionfish because, fun fact, lionfish are actually not native to the Caribbean waters. So the government made it a dish that they encourage chefs to put on their menu so that way they can hunt as many lionfish down as they can. Um, and that way, I guess if you're ever in Turks and Caicos or the Caribbean, just order some lionfish. You'll be helping out the ecosystem there and kind of restore balance to marine life. The last one I chose was jerk chicken or fish, which is basically just pulled apart fish or chicken. It's then dipped in melted butter and coated with herbs and spices, and then it's fried in a hot pan. So that's always really good. And I highly recommend that one. Obviously, none of these are that healthy, but you're on vacation. It doesn't really matter, you know? The last thing I chose was Grace Bay Club or Grace Bay Resort. It is like the most high-end resort on the island. Has some of the best restaurants. It has the nicest beaches, and it has like three different sections to it. There's like a main hotel part, then there's like the resort part, um, and it's a really nice club, and I think you should check it out if you ever visit. So that brings me to my first text, The Unforeseeable Diversity of the World by Edouard Glissant. Um, so the main themes that I wanted to talk about were identity, discover and rule, and stories lost. So Glissant talks a lot about identity in the text, and I wanted to relate this back to the identity of the island being handed back and forth between mother countries. Obviously, like I said before, Turks and Caicos Turks and Caicos has gone through so many different rulers. First, Spaniards were there, then the Bermudians were there, then the French were there, then the British were there, then the French were there again, then the British came back and they got the island in the Treaty of Versailles. So I wanted to just touch on this because it's kind of shaping the whole identity of the island through a whole bunch of different people, right? So identity doesn't really come from one specific thing. It kind of comes from a combination of a bunch of different cultures, and that's how the identity of the island is structured today. The second theme, discover and rule. I wanted to just touch on Columbus again. When Columbus got there, he did enslave or kill most of the natives that were there. Um, just because the European technology was so much more advanced, and a lot of the natives died to European diseases, which they didn't have any immunity to. A lot of them killed themselves, actually, because of how rough the conditions were. And then the last theme I wanted to talk about was stories lost, right? So in the text, Laussant talks about how history is written by the victor, and I thought this was a really important theme to bring up because it does go back to the history of the island. Basically, history is written by the victor. There's not a lot of um, information on the Lucan and Taino people, just because at that time they weren't writing a lot of things down. They weren't building um, a lot on the island. They were kind of just living off of the land. So the only information that we have about them is from the Spaniards, and that means we're missing out on so many different stories, probably um, a lot of different culture that we're probably never going to ever get to learn about, which I thought was really sad. That brings me on to my next thing about the poem to Julia de Burgos. So the three things that I picked out here were addresses violence to her natives, ties to slavery, and self-governance. So the quote I picked out was leaving behind ashes of burned injustice. Um, so even though she's from Puerto Rico, I feel like these themes all connect back to the Turks and Caicos as well. So this theme of leaving behind ashes kind of relates back to Columbus and how he decimated the entire Lucan population within a couple decades. Um, and then this slavery one goes in the same thing as that. You and yourself have no say. Everyone governs you, and that's um, kind of how the people of Turks and Caicos were enslaved by Columbus. And then this theme of self governance, um, not in me, in me only my heart governs, only my thought. Who governs in me is me. So I thought this kind of related back to um, how Turks and Caicos has been through so much and been conquered so many different times. And and as of right now, being a British territory, British overseas territory, they are still self-governing, even though they are technically under British rule. So I thought that kind of related to this theme of self-governance, because even though they are British territory, they do self-govern and they're capable of doing their own thing on the island. And I thought that was really powerful since they have been kind of traded back and forth between different countries throughout their entire history. So why Turks and Caicos? Like I said in the beginning, I visited there. I absolutely love the island. It's just an incredible place to be on vacation. The people there are so lively and kind, and everyone just wants to help you with everything. Um, and everyone's really nice. Um, the kind of whole vibe there is a lot happier. Um, and the second or third bullet, island time, I wanted to kind of touch on that because island time, I think, is something that everyone can kind of look up to and learn something from. So if you don't know what island time is, island time basically means when you're on the islands in the Caribbean, everything just moves a little bit slower. Nobody is kind of rushing to get things done like they do in the Northeast. Everyone's kind of a little bit more relaxed. And I think that has to do with their happiness levels. Everyone's so happy because no one's stressed out as much, not nearly as much as they are up here in the Northeast, where people are running back and forth to work, then to bring their kids to practice, then coming home and doing more work. It's just a completely different vibe in the Caribbean, especially in Turks and Caicos. And I love that. And I think I would hope that the U.S. maybe does not stay as fast paced as it is forever. Hopefully, they can learn something from the Caribbean. And then finally, it's kind of a comeback story. Like I've been saying this whole presentation, I'm inspired by the way that Turks and Caicos has literally been through so much in its history, and it's still an incredible place to visit. Um, Everyone there is happy, like I said. Um, and looking at their history, it's incredible that they are where they are today. So beyond the island, what can I learn outside of the classroom? I feel like learning about Turks and Caicos has kind of given me a better view on the egocentrism of the United States. Um, we tend to think that all of the problems are here in our home when there's really a lot more going on, and that I feel like that made me a little bit more culturally aware. Um, and this last piece I want to touch on was firsthand experience. So I wrote this little paragraph in my abstract and I want to just touch on it again. It is imperative that we as students study the firsthand experiences of people who have lived through the past and know the events that took place that we are not taught in normal history class. That way, we can be more understanding and willing to fix the future. So I bolded normal because I wanted to just touch on that a little bit more. Normal history class, I kind of define as like your typical standard um, high school history class where they teach us that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 and discovered the Americas and discovered the Caribbean. When in fact there were already people living there the entire time. And what they don't teach us is that in order to kind of take over these places, he had to kill um, so many different amounts of people in order to be able to do it. And I think that's something that goes unsaid way too often. And I think Columbus is a little bit overvalued, and I think it's important that we understand that so that way in the future we can be more on the lookout for these certain types of things. So here's my sources. I just want to say thank you for everyone listening to my presentation. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you have a good day.